She gently extended a glass of water to me, adorned with an engraving of an antique lily, and her fingers studded with diamonds seemed to faintly mimic the tremor of my own hands. "Drink, my dear daughter, it's for your health. True children shouldn't suffer because of other people's mistakes," said Olivia Vance, and in her flawlessly even velvet-soft voice there wasn't a trace of madness, only a chilling, unwavering certainty. I obediently took a sip, but a second before that I had managed to quietly switch our glasses while she turned toward the window. 10 minutes later her perfect posture faltered, her aristocratic pallor shifted into an earthy hue, and I realized there was no way back out of that cursed mansion for me anymore. And it had all begun completely differently 3 months earlier, when I was just a desperate girl willing to grab onto any job offer. My former life in a suburb of Boston was falling apart at a frightening speed, leaving only my mother's medical debts and an empty refrigerator in my rented apartment behind. Every morning began with the same ritual. I brewed cheap instant coffee that tasted like burnt newspaper and would sit for a long time staring at the worn silver pendant around my neck, the only thing left from my parents. The texture of that pendant, cold and slightly rough from tiny scratches, always soothed me, reminding me of who I was. My domestic staffing agency hadn't been able to offer anything worthwhile for 3 months, until one rainy Tuesday an unfamiliar number flashed on my phone screen. The agent's voice, Mr. Harris's, sounded unusually formal as he informed me that Mrs. Olivia Vance, the owner of a vast estate in an affluent Massachusetts neighborhood, was looking for a personal caregiver. The requirements were standard, but the offered salary was 3 times the market rate, which made my heart start beating in a feverish, uneven rhythm. When the old taxi stopped at the wrought iron gates of the Vance Hall estate, I was breathless at the scale of the place. A massive 3-story gray stone mansion, surrounded by centuries-old oaks, looked completely uninhabited, like a set from a Gothic film. The air here smelled of wet pine, old wood, and a barely perceptible, expensive perfume with notes of white lily, which, as I later learned, Mrs. Olivia ordered exclusively from France. Inside the house, there was an overwhelming, oppressive silence, broken only by the steady ticking of a grandfather clock in the foyer. I was met by the butler, an elderly man named Dylan, whose face resembled a frozen mask, showing no emotion at all. He silently led me through long corridors lined with thick carpets that muffled every step, and that dull sound made it feel as though we were descending to the bottom of a deep well. Mrs. Olivia Vance sat in a wheelchair by a tall bay window in a large living room filled with pale afternoon light. Despite her age and the illness that confined her to the chair, she looked regal, perfectly styled silver hair, a steel gray silk dress, and a pair of piercing gray eyes that seemed to cut straight through me. I stopped 3 steps away from her, feeling how the wool fabric of my inexpensive jacket suddenly seemed too stifling and out of place in this interior. Dylan politely cleared his throat to draw her attention and stepped back, leaving us alone. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Olivia. My name is Clara Harper. I'm your new caregiver," I said, trying to make my voice sound as professional and steady as possible. The woman did not move, continuing to study my face as though comparing it to some invisible blueprint in her mind. The pause stretched so long that in the silence of the room I could hear an old refrigerator humming somewhere deep in the enormous kitchen. Finally, her thin lips curved into a strange, barely noticeable smile that sent a cold shiver down my spine. "Forget that name, my dear. You won't need it here anymore," Mrs. Olivia drawled with poisonous sweetness, slowly lifting her manicured hand. "I knew you would come back to me once you realize the whole rest of the world is just a facade. Welcome home, my true child." I blinked in confusion, deciding that the elderly lady was simply having an episode of age-related dementia, which for some reason the agency hadn't warned me about. Trying to smooth over the awkwardness, I stepped forward and carefully adjusted the blanket that had slipped from her lap, feeling my fingers unconsciously tighten around the expensive fabric. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Olivia, but perhaps you're confusing me with someone else," I replied quietly, almost in a whisper, trying to keep my tone gentle and reassuring. "My name is Clara, and I came here to help you with your treatments and to monitor your medication schedule." "Don't you dare speak such nonsense in my house," she said sharply, her voice instantly losing its former softness and turning as hard as granite. "Your past, your old documents, the people you mistakenly believed were your family. All of it was nothing more than a prolonged misunderstanding. From this moment on, You are not to utter a single word about anything that happened before you came here. We don't need ghosts in these walls. Such a strange condition made me tense up internally, but the thought of unpaid bills and the threat of being evicted from my own apartment quickly drowned out that quiet voice of intuition. In the end, rich people were often eccentric, and the pay for this job would allow me to close all my financial gaps in just a couple of months. I decided to play along, treating it as part of my professional duties of caring for a mentally unstable patient. The first 2 weeks passed in relative calm, if not for the fact that Mrs. Olivia strictly enforced her strange rule. The moment I accidentally mentioned my youth in Boston or my late mother's tastes, Olivia would cut me off with a frosty stare or deliberately close her eyes, signaling that the conversation was over. She demanded that I stay by her side at all times, read her old novels, and serve tea exclusively in a porcelain set decorated with lilies. Gradually, I caught myself thinking that this enormous mansion was beginning to draw me into its web, and the oppressive silence no longer felt so frightening. Between us, some strange, inexplicable emotional bond began to form, one that both frightened and attracted me. Olivia could be incredibly generous and caring. She ordered expensive clothes for me, made sure I was eating properly, and would often stroke my hair for long stretches when I sat on the ottoman at her feet. In those moments, I caught myself in the shameful thought that I had never experienced such all-encompassing, if suffocating maternal care in my life. My own mother, before her death, had been ill for a long time and too absorbed in her suffering to pay attention to my feelings. Here it was as if I were filling the vast, gaping void that had lived inside my chest for years. However, the first serious doubts crept into my soul during the 3rd week of my stay at Vance Hall. Mrs. Olivia fell asleep after her afternoon medication, and Dylan went into town for groceries, leaving me alone in the deserted wing of the house. Wandering through the long gallery on the 2nd floor, I came across a half-open door leading into the old study of Olivia's late husband, a room I had been strictly forbidden to enter. Curiosity, mixed with an unexplainable premonition, pushed me to step inside. The room smelled of dust, old books, and dried flowers. I approached the massive oak desk, feeling my hands begin to tremble slightly at the realization that I was breaking a direct order from the mistress of the house. On the lower shelf of the bookcase lay an antique leather photo album, velvet-bound and roughened by time. My heart was pounding in my throat rather than in my chest as I slowly opened the heavy cover, afraid of every sound in the empty house. On the first page was a yellowed newspaper clipping from 20 years ago, its headline freezing the blood in my veins. Vance family tragedy, only daughter of heiress line missing. I turned the page, and at that moment my phone vibrated in my pocket with an incoming message, making me cry out in surprise. The metallic taste of adrenaline filled my mouth instantly, but I forced myself to look at the next photograph in the album. From the glossy image, a young woman about my age stared back at me, dressed in the same silk dress Olivia was wearing now. She had the same slightly wavy chestnut hair, the same shape of lips, and most horrifying of all, the exact same silver pendant around her neck, the one that now lay against my own chest. I grabbed my pendant with trembling fingers, comparing the details. The engraved lines, the tiny scratches, everything matched with terrifying precision. A ringing filled my ears so loudly that surrounding sounds turned into a distant, dull hum and my legs went weak, forcing me to brace myself against the edge of the desk to keep from collapsing. "You shouldn't have come here, Clara," came Dylan's quiet, creaking voice from behind me. He had returned far earlier than I expected. I spun around quickly, hiding my hands behind my back, though the album remained open in full view in front of him. The butler stood in the doorway, his face unreadable, but something like genuine pity mixed with fear flickered in his eyes. "Who is that girl in the photo, Dylan?" I managed to say, feeling bile rise in my throat from mounting panic. "And why does she have the same pendant as me? Please tell me the truth, otherwise I'm leaving here right now." "This is Lillian, Mrs. Olivia's real daughter," Dylan said quietly, almost in a whisper, stepping into the room and firmly closing the door behind him. "She went missing more than 20 years ago, when she was just a child. Mrs. Olivia never managed to get over that loss. Her mind broke under it. All these years she kept searching for her, rejecting any logical arguments. When the agency sent your resume with your photo, she immediately said her search was finally over. But that's impossible. I hissed through clenched teeth, feeling cold sweat run down my back. I was born and raised in Boston. My mother is Mary Harper. I have a birth certificate, I have memories. Mrs. Olivia is just using me to numb her pain, and that pendant. It's just a coincidence. Mary Harper used to work in this house as a junior maid, Clara, Dylan said, and those words exploded like a bomb in the confined space of the office. She quit in the very same month little Lillian disappeared. Mrs. Olivia is not insane in the usual sense. She knows far more than she says, and her insistent demand that you forget your past is not a whim. It's a way of making you believe you belong here. A heavy, ringing silence fell, the kind of silence in which you can almost hear your familiar world collapsing. My hands, gripping the edge of the oak table, went white from tension, and dark spots swam before my eyes. My entire life, all my memories of my poor but honest mother, suddenly came under suspicious scrutiny. Could it be that the woman I had mourned was actually a kidnapper who stole me from my real family and wealth? Or were Dylan and Olivia playing their own elaborate game, the end goal of which I still couldn't see? The next morning, the atmosphere in the mansion had changed. It had become tangibly thick and unsettling. I brought Mrs. Olivia her morning coffee, but my hands shook so badly that the porcelain cup clinked pitifully against the saucer. Olivia sat in her armchair, dressed in a flawless morning suit, her gaze fixed on me with a new triumphant intensity. She slowly dabbed her lips with a silk napkin and motioned for me to sit opposite her. "You look pale today, dear," she drawled casually, sipping her hot drink. "Dylan told me you were overly curious yesterday. I did ask you not to dig into what has long been buried under a layer of dust." "I saw photographs of Lillian, Mrs. Olivia," I said evenly, my own voice turning cold as I looked her straight in the eye. "And I know my mother worked here. You need to explain what is going on. I cannot stay here as some kind of living toy replacing your dead daughter." "Your mother?" Olivia slammed her palm on the table so hard that the coffee cup jumped, her face twisting with rage. "That thief and pauper had no right to call herself your mother. She took you from me when you were an infant, hoping to extort money, but she got scared of the police and ran. All these years you lived in poverty while I went mad with grief. And now you stand here defending her memory? We are the same blood, Clara, and you will stay here because this is your rightful place." "That's a lie," I shouted, tears burning in my eyes and my breath catching with rising emotion. "My mother loved me. She would never have committed such a crime. You just want to rewrite the story to suit yourself so you don't have to feel alone. I'm leaving. I'm going back to Boston." "Try it," Olivia hissed, a dangerous, unhinged glint flashing in her eyes. "Your documents are locked in my safe, and all your so-called mother's medical bills in the Boston clinic are being paid from my fund. If you leave, I will cancel the payments, and your name will be dragged through lawsuits tied to a dead debtor. You're not going anywhere because you belong to me." This first open confrontation showed me that Olivia Vance was far from a helpless old woman. She was a calculating and cruel manipulator who had planned every one of my moves. For a second it felt like everything could still be explained, like I could simply escape through a window or call the police. But the words about my mother's debts and my blocked documents tied my hands, creating the illusion of absolute helplessness. I had limited time to figure everything out. The sale of my old apartment was due to close in a week, and if I didn't return, I would lose my last place of refuge. That evening I locked myself in my room, trying to steady the tremor running through my entire body. The coffee tasted like bitter ash in my mouth, and I couldn't force myself to swallow a single bite of the food Dylan had brought me on a tray. At that moment, the silence of the empty room was broken by a soft tap at the window. A storm was raging outside, and the branches of the old oak were scraping against the glass as if trying to warn me of danger. I walked up to the mirror and stared at my reflection for a long time. At that cursed silver pendant that now felt not like a symbol of comfort, but like a true mark of bondage. Olivia's insistence on controlling my life, which I had initially mistaken for a twisted kind of care, now appeared for what it truly was. A calculated move to completely erase my identity. I realized in the middle of the night that I wouldn't be able to sleep until I found definitive proof. Taking advantage of the fact that everyone in the house was asleep, and that the rumble of thunder drowned out any sound, I slipped into the main library where Olivia usually kept her personal documents. My fingers frantically sifted through the folders in the bottom drawer of her writing desk, until I came across a thick envelope made of wax paper with my name written on it. It was a delayed bomb. I didn't open it right away, feeling cold sweat run down my back despite the stifling air of the room. At first, I just held it in my hands, feeling the rough texture of the paper, then slowly tore open the edge, afraid to see what might destroy my life forever. Inside were the results of a private DNA test conducted by an agency at Olivia's request, long before I was officially hired. I stared at the dry lines of the report, where it was written in black and white. The probability of a biological relationship between Olivia Vance and Clara Harper was 0%. I read that line 3 times, feeling a strange icy relief spreading through my chest, mixed with absolute horror. Olivia knew. She had known from the very beginning that I wasn't her daughter, that the pendant was either a tragic coincidence or a carefully staged forgery planted by her agents among my mother's belongings. All her speeches about a real child, all that suffocating care and those demands to forget the past, had been part of a deranged plan to create a perfect surrogate for her dead Lillian. She wasn't searching for the truth. She was constructing it out of me, using my vulnerability and debts as perfect clay. But the next document in the envelope struck me even harder, becoming a second layer in this intricate cake of betrayal. It was a copy of an old contract between my mother, Mary Harper, and the late husband of Olivia, Arthur Vance. The text revealed that Mary had never kidnapped Lillian. The Vance's real daughter had died in a water accident caused by Olivia herself, who had been intoxicated at the time. Arthur Vance paid Mary a large sum of money to take the blame and disappear, protecting the family's reputation from public scandal and Olivia from prison. My mother had lived her entire life in fear and poverty, carrying the label of a criminal, so that this aristocratic couple could continue to shine in society. And the most horrifying part was that Dylan, that silent observer, had known everything and had helped hide the truth for years. At that moment, a harsh light burst into the library, making me flinch. Dylan stood in the doorway, but there was no longer a tray with tea in his hands. Instead, he held a phone, its screen showing that a recording was in progress. His face showed no remorse, only the cold, calculated resolve of someone who had been waiting for this moment for a long time. "You found what you were looking for, Clara?" he asked evenly, his voice making it hard to breathe. "Now you understand there's no easy way out of here. Olivia will never let you go, because you are her last illusion, her way of atoning for her dead daughter. But I have a different proposal for you." "You knew all of this, Dylan?" I spat through my teeth, feeling the keys to my old apartment dig into my palm in my pocket, though I felt no physical pain. "You're an accomplice in this nightmare. My mother died in poverty because of your lies, and you're offering me a deal. Your mother was paid, Clara. She simply didn't know how to manage the money," Dylan replied with tired calm, taking a step closer. "My interest is simple. Olivia is planning to rewrite her entire will in your favor, believing you are her daughter. If you play along until the end, we split the Vance fortune after her death, which, trust me, won't take long. Otherwise, these documents go to the police, and you'll be the one accused of blackmail. You have until morning to make the right decision." The false hope that Dylan might become my ally in this house shattered with a deafening crack, leaving only cold, crystalline rage behind. I understood I was in a nest of snakes, where everyone was trying to use me for their own gain. Something inside me shifted at that moment. The tears dried completely, and my hands stopped shaking. I was no longer the frightened caregiver clinging to a low-paying job. I had become a dangerous witness, stripped of everything, including my mother's good name. I spent the night awake, sitting by my bedroom window, watching the first blinding rays of morning sun break through the clouds. An untouched cup of tea stood on my desk, already cold, while a clear, cold plan formed in my mind. I took out my old phone, still not confiscated by Olivia, and called Mr. Harris at the agency, not as a frightened employee but as someone holding evidence capable of destroying his business. Using legal terminology I had picked up while studying the documents, I forced him to give me the private contact of the Vance family lawyer, Mr. Bradley, who had long been looking for a reason to remove Dylan from his position as estate manager. When morning procedures began, I walked down into the living room with ice-cold calm. Olivia sat in her usual place, surrounded by the scent of white lilies, her glass of water already waiting on the small table. Dylan stood frozen by the doorway watching me, searching for my decision. That was when the scene with the glasses happened, the one that marked the beginning of my path to freedom. When Olivia, weakened by the switched sleeping medication, slumped back into her chair, I knew it was time to strike the final blow. "Dylan, invite our guest," I said clearly and loudly, turning toward the doors, which opened at that very moment. Mr. Bradley entered the room, accompanied by 2 local police officers whom I had called half an hour earlier after sending them digital copies of Arthur Vance's contract and the DNA results through the lawyer's encrypted channel. Dylan's face instantly lost its mask of composure. His jaw tightened until the muscles stood out sharply, and the phone he had used to record our conversation slipped from his trembling hands and hit the floor with a heavy clatter. "What is going on here?" "Clara, my dear, who are these people?" Olivia muttered weakly, trying to rise, but the medication made her movements unsteady. "Adult matters are over, Olivia. Real ones are beginning," I said sharply, stepping back and folding my arms. "That girl in the photograph in your office is dead because of you, and my mother, Mary Harper, was innocent. You used me like a living doll, but your game is over. Mr. Bradley, all the originals are in the safe in the library, the code to which Dylan so kindly wrote down in his notebook." The police officers approached Dylan, and the sound of handcuffs snapping around his wrists echoed through the living room like a final victory salute. He tried to shout something, but his voice broke into a raw, unintelligible snarl. One of the officers firmly grabbed his arm and led him toward the exit. Mr. Bradley shook his head, looking at the pale, shaken Olivia, who no longer resembled a commanding aristocrat, only a frightened, broken old woman who had lost control of her lives and her fortune. The legal consequences for the Vance family and their manager unfolded with the speed of a domino effect. The public scandal destroyed what was left of Olivia's foundation's reputation. Her accounts were frozen during the investigation into the concealment of a crime and unlawful detention of a person. Dylan received a real prison sentence for blackmail and complicity, while Olivia herself was transferred to a specialized closed psychiatric facility, where her delusional fantasies about a real child could no longer harm living people. My mother was posthumously exonerated, and her name was finally cleared of years of defamation. 3 months passed. I was sitting on the veranda of a small, cozy house I had rented on the coast, far away from the dark Vance Hall and its secrets. On my lap lay that same silver locket, which had once seemed like a symbol of someone else's lies, but had now regained its true meaning. A reminder of the strength and love of my real mother, Mary Harper. On the small table, a cup of fresh, fragrant coffee was steaming, and I slowly took my first sip, feeling the warm sea breeze touch my face. The silver locket around my neck no longer felt like a heavy burden from someone else's past. It had become a symbol of my own freedom. The silence around me no longer frightened me. It belonged to me now, and it was priceless.